What if I told you that during World War II, a bear officially enlisted in the Polish army and carried artillery shells into battle? The Soviets trained dogs to blow up tanks, but the plan backfired spectacularly, and Hitler's nephew fought for the US Navy? Yep, behind the battlefields, generals, and history books lies a side of World War II that's stranger than fiction. So here's what we're going to do. Over the next few hours, I'm going to walk you through 99 bizarre, true, and verified facts about World War II that'll make you rethink everything you thought you knew. Before we start, if you enjoy falling asleep to weird history delivered with just the right amount of sarcasm, consider subscribing. Hit the like button if you're impressed that Hitler's nephew actually fought against him. Because honestly, that family reunion would have been awkward. Now, settle in, get comfortable. Dim that screen. Seriously, why is it always so bright at night? And let's dive into the strangest, most unbelievable corners of World War II, starting with a family problem that makes your relatives look absolutely normal. Hitler's nephew fought for the US Navy, William Patrick. Hitler had quite the family problem. Born in Liverpool, England in 1911, he was the son of Adolf Hitler's half-brother Alois. Young William visited Germany in the 1930s and tried leveraging his infamous uncle's name for personal gain. He even attempted to blackmail Adolf, threatening to reveal embarrassing family secrets. That didn't go well. By 1939, William fled to America, touring the country and giving anti-Nazi lectures. When the United States entered World War II, he petitioned Franklin D. Roosevelt directly, asking to serve. After FBI background checks and much deliberation, he was allowed to enlist. William Patrick Hitler served in the US Navy as a pharmacist's mate, earning a Purple Heart after being wounded. After the war, he changed his surname to Stuart Houston and lived quietly on Long Island until his death in 1987. But speaking of unlikely wartime deceptions, the Allies had an even stranger trick up their sleeves. The ghost army that used inflatable tanks to fool the Nazis. The 23rd Headquarters, special troops nicknamed the Ghost Army, was perhaps the most creative military unit in history. Activated in 1944, this 1,000-man unit consisted of artists, sound engineers, and designers recruited from art schools across America. Their mission was pure theater. Deceive the Germans into thinking Allied forces were positioned where they weren't. They used inflatable rubber tanks, fake artillery pieces, and recorded sounds of tank battalions played through massive speakers. They even wore fake unit patches and frequented local bars, loudly discussing non-existent military operations. The Ghost Army staged more than 20 battlefield deceptions across Europe, often operating just miles from actual front lines. Their dummy equipment was so convincing that German reconnaissance planes photographed the fakes, reporting them as legitimate threats. The unit's work is estimated to have saved thousands of Allied lives. Their existence remained classified until 1996. And while the Americans were busy with theatrical warfare, the British had other priorities entirely, even in combat. British soldiers issued tea-making kits in their tanks. The British take their tea seriously, even during warfare. During World War II, British tank crews faced a dangerous dilemma. Brewing tea meant exiting the tank, exposing themselves to enemy fire. The solution came with the boiling vessel, an ingenious device installed in tanks starting in the 1947. This electric kettle, officially called BV for short, allowed crews to boil water for tea, coffee, or soup without leaving their armored vehicles. The system became standard equipment in British tanks and remains so today. Historians note that British commanders recognized tea breaks weren't just about beverages. They were crucial for morale and decision-making. A properly brewed cup of tea meant calmer nerves and clearer thinking during intense combat situations. The innovation proved so successful that modern British military vehicles, including the Challenger 2 tank, still include boiling vessels as standard equipment. While the British perfected their tea service across the Pacific, Japan was attempting something far more ambitious and bizarre. The Japanese tried to bomb the US with balloons. Between November 1944 and April 1945, Japan launched approximately 9,000 balloon bombs toward North America. These Fugo weapons were 33 feet in diameter, carried 15-kilogram bombs, and rode the jet stream across the Pacific Ocean. The plan was ingenious. Hydrogen-filled balloons would float at 30,000 feet, traveling over 5,000 miles in roughly 3 days. An altimeter and sandbag system maintained altitude. When the balloons reached North America, they'd drop incendiary and anti-personnel bombs, hopefully causing forest fires and civilian panic. About 1,000 balloons actually reached the continent, landing from Alaska to Mexico and as far east as Michigan. Most caused little damage. The only fatalities occurred near Bly, Oregon, where a pregnant woman and 5 children died during a church picnic when they found and disturbed an unexploded device. The U.S. government imposed a media blackout, preventing Japan from learning their balloon's success rate. Not knowing if their weapons worked, Japan abandoned the program. But Japan wasn't the only nation whose leaders' families suffered during the war. Stalin's son died in a Nazi prison camp. Yakov Jugashvili, Joseph Stalin's eldest son from his first marriage, had a complicated relationship with his father. Stalin reportedly once said, "He can't even shoot straight," after Yakov's failed suicide attempt. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Yakov served as an artillery officer. He was captured in July 1941 during the Battle of Smolensk. The Germans saw propaganda value in Stalin's son as a prisoner. They offered to exchange him for Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, captured at Stalingrad. Stalin refused, famously stating, "I will not trade a marshal for a lieutenant," though accounts of his exact words vary. Some historians believe Stalin said, "I have no son named Yakov." Yakov died at Sachsenhausen concentration camp on April 14, 1943. Official German records claim he committed suicide by running into electrified fence wire after an argument with British prisoners. However, many historians suspect he was murdered. While Stalin's son faced tragedy, American soldiers were being trained using surprisingly unconventional methods. U.S. soldiers were taught how to spot enemy tanks with playing cards. The United States military needed a quick way to train hundreds of thousands of soldiers to identify enemy vehicles. The solution was brilliantly simple: playing cards. In 1943, the U.S. Playing Card Company produced special decks featuring silhouettes of German, Italian, and Japanese aircraft, ships, and tanks. Each card displayed a different vehicle from multiple angles, along with specifications and identifying features. Soldiers could study these cards during downtime, turning learning into a game. The spotter cards proved remarkably effective for teaching rapid recognition skills essential in combat situations where split-second identification could mean life or death. Similar identification cards were produced for aircraft, helping anti-aircraft gunners distinguish friendly planes from enemy bombers. These training aids were so successful that variations continued through the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Even today, modern militaries use similar recognition cards for contemporary equipment. While American soldiers studied their cards, Britain's Prime Minister had rather unconventional stress relief methods during the Blitz. Winston Churchill took long, naked baths during air raids. Winston Churchill's bathing habits were legendary and eccentric. The Prime Minister regularly spent hours in the bathtub, conducting meetings and dictating correspondence while naked and submerged. During the Blitz, when German bombs fell on London, Churchill refused to alter his routine. His staff grew accustomed to discussing critical war strategy while the Prime Minister soaked, cigar in hand, completely nude. He installed bathrooms wherever he worked, insisting on specific water temperatures and bath sizes. Churchill believed bathing sparked creativity and helped him think clearly. He reportedly told his private secretary, "The Prime Minister has nothing to hide from the President of the United States," after Franklin Roosevelt accidentally encountered him emerging naked from the bath. Whether this meeting actually occurred remains historically debated. but Churchill's bathing habits are well documented. His daily routine included a morning bath, an afternoon nap, and often an evening bath. While Churchill had his peculiar habits, the Polish forces had an even more unusual addition to their ranks. A bear named Wojtek served in the Polish army in 1942. Polish soldiers evacuating from the Soviet Union through Iran encountered a young boy carrying an orphaned Syrian brown bear cub. They purchased the cub, named him Wojtek, meaning happy warrior, and he became their mascot. Wojtek quickly grew to over 6 feet tall and 225 pounds. He developed quite the personality, drinking beer, smoking cigarettes. He'd eat them if no one lit them, wrestling with soldiers, and sleeping in their tents. When the Polish Second Corps prepared to ship to Italy in 1944, British transport regulations prohibited pets and mascots aboard. The solution was simple: officially enlist Wojtek. He received a paybook, rank, and serial number, becoming Private Wojtek. During the brutal Battle of Monte Cassino, Wojtek carried crates of artillery shells, never dropping a single one. His image, carrying an artillery shell, became the official emblem of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. After the war, Wojtek lived at Edinburgh Zoo until his death in 1963. But not all wartime innovations were as heartwarming as a beer-drinking bear. The Nazis invented the modern sex doll and abandoned it. Operation Borghild remains one of World War II's strangest alleged projects. Heinrich Himmler reportedly worried about German soldiers contracting syphilis from French prostitutes, threatening military effectiveness. The proposed solution was synthetic companions. In 1940, Himmler supposedly contacted Danish physician Olin Hannesson to develop inflatable dolls. The SS allegedly ordered prototypes with fair skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes, conforming to Aryan ideals. However, historical evidence for this program remains controversial and limited. Some historians claim prototypes were tested in 1941, but soldiers refused to carry them, finding them embarrassing. The project was allegedly abandoned in 1942. The factory where dolls were supposedly produced was destroyed during the bombing of Dresden in 1945, eliminating most evidence. While some historians insist the program existed, others argue it's largely myth with minimal documentation. Regardless, the story illustrates the bizarre lengths Nazi leadership considered. Of course, some Germans opposed Hitler more directly and courageously than others. German generals plotted to kill Hitler more than once. Adolf Hitler survived over 40 assassination attempts during his regime. The most famous occurred on July 20th, 1944. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, a decorated war hero who'd lost his left eye, right hand, and 2 fingers in combat, led Operation Valkyrie. He placed a briefcase bomb in Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters during a military conference. The bomb exploded, killing 4 people and injuring several others, but Hitler survived with minor injuries. Someone had unknowingly moved the briefcase behind a thick table leg, shielding Hitler from the blast's full force. Stauffenberg and his co-conspirators were quickly captured and executed. However, this wasn't the first attempt. Earlier plots included the Oster conspiracy in 1938 and Georg Elser's bomb in 1939, which exploded 13 minutes after Hitler left the building. Many Wehrmacht officers grew increasingly disillusioned with Hitler's leadership, especially after devastating defeats. While some Germans plotted against Hitler, American military planners were conducting unusual experiments at home. The U.S. military built a fake town to test bomb damage on buildings in the Utah desert, 40 miles from Salt Lake City. The U.S. military constructed entire replica neighborhoods during World War II. This wasn't for training. It was for destruction. At the Dugway Proving Ground, established in 1942, military engineers built precise replicas of German and Japanese residential buildings. They studied architecture, construction materials, and typical furnishings from Axis nations. German village replicas featured timber frame construction with stucco exteriors. Japanese sections included traditional wooden homes with paper screens and tatami mats. The military then bombed these structures repeatedly, testing various incendiary devices to determine which weapons would most effectively destroy enemy cities. These tests directly influenced the development of M69 incendiary bombs, used in devastating firebombing campaigns against German and Japanese cities. Furniture, household items, and building layouts were meticulously researched to ensure accurate burn patterns. Some structures were rebuilt multiple times for repeated testing. The program remained classified for decades. And speaking of controversial wartime decisions, Hitler himself once received an honor that now seems incomprehensible. Hitler was once Time magazine's Man of the Year, 1938. On January 2nd, 1939, Time magazine featured Adolf Hitler as their 1938 Man of the Year. This wasn't an endorsement, but recognition of his undeniable impact on world events. The accompanying article was hardly flattering, describing him as the greatest threatening force that the democratic, freedom-loving world faces today. Time's Man of the Year recognizes the person who most influenced news and world events, for better or worse. Previous recipients included Franklin D. Roosevelt, Joseph Stalin, and later controversial figures like Ayatollah Khomeini. The 1938 choice acknowledged Hitler's annexation of Austria, the Munich Agreement, and his growing threat to European stability. The article presciently warned about Hitler's ambitions and the dangers of appeasement. Time's editors understood their choice would prove controversial, but argued ignoring Hitler's influence would be journalistic dishonesty. The cover image depicted Hitler playing a grotesque organ with tortured victims in the background. While Time was naming Hitler, one American was already fighting against fascism before his country joined the war. The first American to die in WWII died before the U.S. officially entered the war. Captain Robert Moffett Lucy holds the tragic distinction of being the first American military casualty of World War II. On April 21, 1940, Lucy was serving as a military attaché in Norway, observing German military operations. When German aircraft bombed Dombås, Norway, Lucy was killed. More than 19 months before the United States officially entered the war following Pearl Harbor, Lucy had been assisting in evacuating the Norwegian royal family when the attack occurred. He was posthumously promoted to major and received numerous honors. His death highlighted America's growing involvement despite official neutrality. Many Americans were already engaged. Pilots flew for Britain's Eagle squadrons, volunteers joined the American Ambulance Field Service, and journalists covered combat zones. Before Pearl Harbor, American ships had engaged German U-boats in undeclared naval skirmishes. Lucy's death represented the dangerous reality that America was increasingly entangled in the conflict, regardless of official declarations. And when America did enter the war, one group of Americans would prove their loyalty in extraordinary fashion. Japanese American soldiers became one of the most decorated units. While their families endured internment camps, Japanese American soldiers of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team became World War II's most decorated unit for its size and length of service. Initially, Japanese Americans were classified as enemy aliens and barred from service, but in January 1943, the military reversed course, forming segregated units. The 442nd RCT, along with the 100th Infantry Battalion, fought with exceptional courage in Italy and France. Their motto, "Go for broke," reflected their gambling metaphor determination. The unit earned over 18,000 individual decorations, including 21 Medals of Honor, making them the most decorated unit in U.S. military history. They suffered a casualty rate exceeding 300%, meaning the unit was effectively replaced 3 times over due to deaths and injuries. These soldiers fought to prove their loyalty while their families lived behind barbed wire. In 2000, President Clinton awarded 22 Asian American veterans the Medal of Honor after reviewing records revealed discrimination had denied them recognition. Meanwhile, British intelligence was executing one of history's most creative deceptions, Operation Mincemeat. The Allies used a dead body to fool the Nazis. In April 1943, a corpse washed ashore in Spain carrying documents that would change the war. This was Operation Mincemeat, one of history's most successful deceptions. British intelligence obtained the body of Glyndwr Michael, a homeless man who had died from eating rat poison in London. They dressed him as Major William Martin, a Royal Marines officer, and planted fake documents suggesting the Allies would invade Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. They created an entire fictional identity. Letters from a fiancé, theater ticket stubs, and bank correspondence. A submarine released the corpse off Spain's coast, where Spanish authorities recovered it. Spain, officially neutral but Nazi sympathetic, shared the documents with German intelligence. Hitler became convinced the Sicily invasion was a feint. He repositioned troops to Greece, leaving Sicily vulnerable. When the Allies invaded Sicily on July 9, 1943, they encountered lighter resistance than expected. The operation remained classified until 1996. While British intelligence deceived the Nazis with a corpse, an American company was making accommodations for them in a different way. Coca-Cola made a Nazi-friendly soda, Fanta. When World War II began, Coca-Cola's German operations faced a crisis. American syrup imports became impossible due to trade embargoes. Max Keith, who ran Coca-Cola Germany, was fiercely loyal to the company, but trapped behind enemy lines. Unable to make Coca-Cola without syrup, Keith improvised. Using available ingredients, apple pomace, whey, and whatever fruit scraps he could obtain, he created a new beverage in 1940. He told his team to use their fantasy, imagination, which inspired the name Fanta. The drink became surprisingly popular, selling millions of bottles throughout the war. Keith never joined the Nazi Party and maintained Coca-Cola infrastructure despite enormous pressure. After the war, when communication resumed, Keith reported back to Coca-Cola headquarters, turning over all profits from Fanta sales. Coca-Cola was impressed by his loyalty and ingenuity. The company later reformulated Fanta in 1955 using orange flavor, launching it globally. The wartime version tasted nothing like modern Fanta. And while corporations navigated wartime complexities, priceless historical documents faced their own precarious survival. Anne Frank's diary was almost lost to a cleaning lady. After the Frank family's arrest on August 4th, 1944, the secret annex faced an uncertain future. Miep Gies and Bep Voskuijel, two of the helpers who'd hidden the family, returned to the ransacked annex. They found Anne's diary papers scattered across the floor, overlooked by the Gestapo. Miep collected every page, determined to return them to Anne after the war. She kept the diary unread in her desk drawer. Otto Frank, Anne's father and sole family survivor, returned to Amsterdam in June 1945. That's when Miep gave him the diary, saying, "Here is your daughter Anne's legacy to you." Otto initially couldn't read it. When he finally did, he discovered a girl he'd never fully known, her hopes, fears, and remarkable observations about human nature. Meanwhile, the annex building's owner had scheduled a cleaning crew to prepare the space for new tenants. Had Miep not arrived when she did, Anne's diary would have been swept away as rubbish. The diary was first published in 1947. While Anne's words were nearly lost, Allied forces were actively working to save different cultural treasures across Europe. The U.S. had a secret unit of art historians to rescue stolen artwork. The Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program, nicknamed the Monuments Men, was established in 1943. This unlikely group of approximately 345 men and women, museum directors, curators, art historians, artists, architects, and educators, became soldiers with an unusual mission: save Europe's cultural heritage. Armed with lists of stolen artwork and threatened monuments, they followed combat troops into war zones. They prevented unnecessary destruction of historical sites, secured museums, and tracked down millions of stolen art pieces and cultural objects. The Nazis had systematically looted entire countries, stealing an estimated 600,000 pieces. Monuments men discovered Hitler's massive stash in Austrian salt mines at Altaussee, including Vermeer's The Astronomer and the Ghent altarpiece. They worked under dangerous conditions. Several were killed by landmines and sniper fire. Their efforts saved countless irreplaceable cultural treasures that might otherwise have been destroyed or lost forever. The program's work continued until 1951, but while the monuments men saved art, Hitler was busy suppressing something far more common: laughter. Hitler banned jokes about himself, under penalty of death. Nazi Germany wasn't known for its sense of humor, especially regarding Der Führer. Hitler banned jokes about himself, with violators facing imprisonment or execution. The Gestapo maintained files on suspected joke tellers, and ordinary citizens informed on neighbors who'd made offhand comments. Jokes were considered Wehrkraftzersetzung, undermining military morale, a capital offense under wartime law. One documented case involved Joseph Mueller, a Catholic priest executed in 1944 partly for telling a joke comparing Hitler to Christ, the punchline being that Christ was far better. Factory workers were arrested for anti-Hitler jokes told during lunch breaks. Even children weren't immune. Teenagers faced prosecution for satirical songs. The regime recognized humor's subversive power to undermine authority. Despite severe penalties, Germans continued whispering jokes in private, though always with considerable fear. A common one went, "What's the difference between Christianity and National Socialism? In Christianity, one man died for everybody. In National Socialism, everybody dies for one man." Black humor became a tiny act of resistance. Meanwhile, Allied soldiers preparing for D-Day needed their own secret signals, though far less amusing. Paratroopers in Normandy wore cricket clickers to find each other. On June 6, 1944, thousands of American paratroopers jumped into darkness over Normandy. Hours before the beach landings, many landed miles from intended drop zones, scattered across French countryside in darkness. Units became completely separated. Calling out would alert German patrols. The solution was beautifully simple: cheap metal cricket clickers, children's toys that made a distinctive clicking sound. The 101st Airborne Division issued thousands to their troops. One click served as a challenge. 2 clicks provided the correct response. In darkness and chaos, these simple devices helped paratroopers identify friendly forces without speaking. The system wasn't perfect. Some soldiers lost their clickers during jumps, and Germans occasionally obtained them, but it proved remarkably effective. Soldiers nicknamed them crickets. The clicking sounds echoed across Normandy fields throughout that first confused night. Historians estimate the clickers helped save countless lives by preventing friendly fire incidents and allowing scattered units to regroup. These 25-cent toys became iconic symbols of D-Day ingenuity. And speaking of unusual military innovations, British intelligence had attempted something considerably more bizarre earlier in the war. British spies used semen as invisible ink. Briefly, British intelligence's early World War I invisible ink experiments led to some awkward discoveries. In 1915, Captain Sir Mansfield Smith Cumming, head of what would become MI6, sought invisible inks undetectable by German counterintelligence. Common chemicals like lemon juice were easily revealed by heat. One agent, Captain Walter Kirk, suggested using semen. It was readily available, aroused no suspicion if discovered, and was genuinely effective as invisible ink. The method was briefly employed, primarily by British agents in World War I rather than World War II, though the story persisted. However, practical problems emerged. Letters written using this method often emitted a distinctive odor, potentially alerting censors. Additionally, instructions to agents, included the unfortunate guidance to use fresh supplies for each letter. One agent reportedly complained of the procurement difficulties. The British quickly abandoned this method in favor of more practical chemical solutions. Nevertheless, the story endured as one of espionage history's most bizarre footnotes. While British intelligence experimented with questionable writing methods, American prisoners of war were demonstrating remarkable ingenuity. American POWs made fake limbs to help escape. Allied prisoners in German POW camps demonstrated extraordinary creativity when planning escapes. One remarkable innovation involved artificial limbs. Since disabled prisoners were sometimes repatriated through Red Cross exchanges, able-bodied prisoners occasionally faked injuries using homemade prosthetics and casts. They crafted fake plaster casts from papier-mâché and glue, creating convincing injuries. Some fashioned crude prosthetic limbs from wood and metal scraps, strapping them beneath clothing while hiding their real limbs. The disguises had to withstand cursory medical inspections by German doctors. Prisoners also created elaborate, fake documents identifying them as severely wounded soldiers eligible for repatriation. The quality varied considerably. Some attempts were immediately detected, while others successfully fooled guards. Additionally, prisoners genuinely missing limbs sometimes hid escape tools inside their prosthetics. Knowing guards rarely thoroughly inspected medical devices. Hollow wooden legs concealed maps, compasses, and money. This wasn't the only ingenious POW deception. The famous Great Escape involved elaborate forgeries, tunnels, and disguises. But while POWs improvised with whatever materials they found, Native American soldiers were using something far more sophisticated: their native language. The Navajo code talkers used their language to create unbreakable codes. The Navajo code talkers created the only unbroken code in modern military history. In May 1942, the Marines recruited 29 Navajo men to develop a code based on their native language. The Navajo language was ideal, unwritten, extraordinarily complex, tonal, and understood by fewer than 30 non-Navajos worldwide, none of them Japanese. The code talkers developed a sophisticated system assigning Navajo words to military terms. Turtle meant tank, bird meant aircraft, whale meant battleship. For spelling, they created an alphabet using Navajo words. A was Wolachi, auntie. B was shush, bear. The code proved invaluable during Pacific battles. At Iwo Jima, 6 code talkers worked around the clock, sending and receiving over 800 messages without error. Japanese code breakers, who'd successfully broken American codes previously, were completely baffled. Major Howard Connor stated, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." Approximately 400 Navajo Marines served as code talkers. Their work remained classified until 1968. While Americans developed unbreakable codes, the Soviets attempted a different kind of animal warfare with disastrous results. The Soviets trained dogs to blow up tanks, but it didn't go well. Desperate to stop German armored advances, the Soviets developed anti-tank dogs in the early 1940s. The plan seemed logical: train dogs to crawl under tanks carrying explosives. Trainers conditioned dogs to find food under stationary tanks. They'd strap mines to dogs' biceps with detonators triggered by contact with a tank's metal underside. In theory, dogs would run under enemy tanks, the mine would detonate, destroying both tank and dog. In practice, everything went wrong. Dogs were trained using stationary Soviet tanks running on diesel. German tanks moved and ran on gasoline, smelling completely different. Confused dogs often ran toward familiar Soviet tanks instead. Some dogs, terrified by battlefield noise, panicked and ran back to Soviet trenches, still carrying live explosives. Others refused to go near any tanks at all. Some were shot by Soviet troops to prevent them from becoming mobile friendly fire incidents. The program was quietly abandoned after disastrous field tests. Approximately 40 dogs were reportedly used in combat with minimal success. While Soviet dogs created chaos, one Japanese soldier took dedication to unimaginable extremes. Japan's last soldier surrendered in 1974. Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda believed the war was still happening nearly 30 years after it ended. In December 1944, Onoda was stationed on Lubang Island in the Philippines with orders to disrupt enemy operations and never surrender. When American forces liberated the Philippines in 1945, Onoda and 3 other soldiers retreated into the jungle. They survived on coconuts, bananas, and occasional stolen livestock. Over the years, locals dropped leaflets announcing the war's end. Onoda assumed they were Allied propaganda. His companions gradually surrendered or died. By 1972, Onoda was alone. Multiple search parties failed to convince him. Finally, in February 1974, a Japanese explorer named Norio Suzuki found Onoda. But Onoda would only surrender upon receiving direct orders from his commanding officer. Japan located Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, now a bookseller, who traveled to Lubang and formally relieved Onoda of duty on March 9, 1974. Onoda emerged from the jungle in his tattered uniform, still carrying his functioning rifle. He returned to Japan a celebrity, though he'd inadvertently killed approximately 30 Filipino civilians during his decades-long guerrilla campaign. But accidental casualties weren't limited to isolated holdouts. The U.S. Navy accidentally bombed itself. During World War II's confusion, friendly fire incidents were tragically common. One remarkable case occurred during Operation Hailstone on February 17, 1944. American forces launched a massive carrier-based attack against the Japanese naval base at Truk Lagoon in the Caroline Islands. Nearly 500 aircraft from multiple carriers participated in strikes lasting 2 days. During intense combat with complex flight patterns, an American torpedo bomber mistakenly identified the submarine USS Tang as an enemy vessel. The bomber attacked, dropping a 500-pound bomb that struck near the Tang's conning tower. Miraculously, the bomb failed to detonate, bouncing off the submarine's deck and into the water. The Tang survived with only minor damage. Had the bomb exploded, the submarine and its crew would have been lost. The Tang later met its tragic end in October 1944 when its own torpedo malfunctioned, circled back, and struck the submarine, killing 78 crew members. Friendly fire incidents plagued all nations throughout the war, though most military organizations underreported such embarrassing mistakes. And speaking of embarrassing military blunders, Britain had cleverly turned one type of accident into an intelligence asset. The British used pigeon spies. British intelligence recruited an unlikely espionage force, pigeons. During World War II, MI-14, Britain's intelligence photography unit attached tiny cameras to pigeons and released them over German-occupied Europe. The automatic cameras captured images as pigeons flew over enemy installations. This was surprisingly effective. Pigeons naturally flew routes avoiding danger, often escaping notice where aircraft would be shot down. Their aerial photographs revealed German fortifications, troop movements, and V-weapon sites. The program, codenamed Operation Columba, also involved dropping thousands of pigeons into occupied territories with questionnaires for resistance fighters. The birds would return carrying intelligence about German positions. Approximately 16,000 pigeons were parachuted into occupied France, Belgium, and Holland between 1941 and 1944. Hundreds returned with valuable information. 32 pigeons received the Dickin Medal, Britain's highest animal honor. One famous recipient, G.I. Joe, saved over 1,000 British troops by delivering a message preventing friendly firebombing. While pigeons flew overhead, Hitler was obsessing over legendary artifacts he believed would grant him power. Hitler was obsessed with the Spear of Destiny. Adolf Hitler's fascination with the occult led him to pursue legendary artifacts, particularly the Holy Lance, also called the Spear of Destiny. Legend claimed this Roman spear pierced Christ's side during crucifixion, and whoever possessed it held world-conquering power. Hitler first saw the spear in 1912 at Vienna's Hofburg Museum. He became obsessed, studying its history and mystical significance. When Germany annexed Austria in 1938, confiscating the spear was reportedly Hitler's priority. He had it transported to Nuremberg for safekeeping in St. Catherine's Church, where it remained throughout the war. Whether Hitler genuinely believed the spear's supernatural power or simply valued its symbolic propaganda remains debated. His interest in occult artifacts was well documented. He dispatched SS expeditions worldwide seeking mystical objects. American forces captured Nuremberg in April 1945. Lieutenant William Horne discovered the spear in a hidden vault on April 30, 1945. Hitler committed suicide that same day. The spear was eventually returned to Vienna's Hofburg Museum, where it remains today. But not all Allied anti-Nazi schemes involved mysticism. Some were refreshingly practical and petty. There was a plan to put itching powder in Nazi underwear. Allied scientists devoted surprising energy to irritating the Nazis. The Office of Strategic Services, America's wartime intelligence agency and CIA predecessor, developed numerous bizarre schemes to undermine German morale. One plan involved contaminating German uniforms with a substance codenamed Who Me, a sulfur compound that smelled atrociously. Another project aimed to dust Nazi underwear with itching powder. The theory was simple. Irritated, uncomfortable soldiers would prove less effective fighters. Scientists developed pharmaceutical-grade itch-inducing compounds that would survive industrial laundering. Operatives would infiltrate factories or supply depots, contaminating underwear shipments bound for German troops. Whether this plan ever reached implementation remains unclear. OSS records show extensive research, but limited documentation of actual deployment. Similar schemes included laxatives in officer food supplies and chemicals to induce premature balding. These projects reflected the OSS's philosophy that undermining enemy morale through irritation was as valuable as traditional sabotage. While modern historians debate these plans' effectiveness, they certainly demonstrated the Allies' willingness to consider every possible advantage, no matter how ridiculous. And speaking of questionable military decisions, Los Angeles experienced its own surreal moment of wartime paranoia. The Battle of Los Angeles, U.S. fired anti-aircraft rounds at nothing on February 25, 1942. Just months after Pearl Harbor, Los Angeles erupted in chaos. Air raid sirens wailed at 2:25 a.m. Nervous spotters reported unidentified aircraft approaching from the ocean. Anti-aircraft batteries unleashed over 1,400 shells into the night sky for nearly an hour. Searchlights swept frantically. Shrapnel rained on neighborhoods. Several buildings caught fire from falling debris. 3 civilians died in car accidents during the blackout. 3 others suffered heart attacks. The next morning, citizens demanded answers. What had they shot at? Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox initially dismissed it as false alarm jitters. Army officials insisted they'd engaged enemy aircraft. Investigations proved contradictory. No evidence of Japanese planes was ever found. No wreckage, no bombs, nothing. Theories ranged from weather balloons to mass hysteria to actual Japanese reconnaissance. The most likely explanation: initial reports of unidentified objects triggered panic, and once firing began, soldiers shot at their own searchlight beams and exploding shells, creating an illusion of multiple aircraft. The incident embarrassed military leadership and revealed America's coastal vulnerability. It remains one of World War II's strangest incidents. Some Nazis believed in hollow earth theory. While some Allied schemes bordered on absurd, Nazi pseudoscience reached truly bizarre heights. Several high-ranking Nazi officials, including Heinrich Himmler, became fascinated with occult theories, including the hollow Earth hypothesis. This theory proposed that Earth was hollow with accessible interior civilizations. Some Nazis believed a superior Aryan race lived inside the planet. In April 1942, the German Navy reportedly sent an expedition to the Baltic island of Rügen, using infrared cameras aimed skyward. They hoped to spy on British ships by photographing reflections on the supposed inner surface of Earth's shell. The expedition failed spectacularly, wasting valuable wartime resources. Hitler's regime funded numerous pseudoscientific ventures through organizations like the Ahnenerbe, searching for mystical artifacts and validating racial theories. These beliefs influenced military decisions. Some historians argue that resources diverted to occult research weakened Germany's actual scientific war efforts. The Hollow Earth obsession represented Nazi leadership's dangerous combination of racial ideology and pseudoscience. But Nazi pseudoscience wasn't the only strange scientific venture. America was developing its own bizarre biological weapon. The Allies planned to drop bat bombs on Japan. Project X-ray sounds like fiction, but was genuine military research. In 1942, Pennsylvania dentist Lytle Adams proposed weaponizing Mexican free-tailed bats. His plan involved attaching tiny incendiary devices to thousands of bats, cooling them into hibernation, loading them into bomb casings with parachutes, and dropping them over Japanese cities at dawn. The bats would awaken, disperse into buildings, and roost in attics. Timed incendiaries would ignite, causing widespread fires across cities built primarily from wood and paper. The military actually approved this scheme. By 1943, researchers were testing prototypes. During one test at Carlsbad Army Airfield in New Mexico, armed bats escaped, roosting in buildings and setting fire to a general's car and an airplane hangar. Despite chaos, tests showed the concept could work. Researchers estimated bat bombs might be even more effective than conventional incendiaries. However, by 1944, the Manhattan Project showed greater promise. Bat bombs were abandoned, though officials acknowledged they might have succeeded. While America experimented with bats, Soviet leadership was creating human doubles. Stalin had a double who stood in for public events. Joseph Stalin employed at least one official body double, possibly more. Felix Dadaev, a former dancer and juggler, was recruited by the NKVD in 1944 due to his resemblance to Stalin. After extensive training in Stalin's mannerisms, voice, and gestures, Dadaev stood in for the dictator at various public events and military parades when assassination risks seemed high. The deception was remarkably effective. Even close associates sometimes couldn't distinguish them. Dadaev claims he impersonated Stalin for several years, though exact details remained classified until after the Soviet Union's collapse. He published his memoir, I Was Stalin's Double, revealing the program's existence. Other Soviet leaders also employed doubles. Historical photographs show suspicious inconsistencies in various appearances. The practice wasn't unique to Soviets. Churchill and Montgomery also reportedly used doubles for dangerous situations. Stalin's paranoia made doubles particularly useful, allowing him to remain safely hidden while maintaining public presence. The double's existence remained one of World War II's better-kept secrets. Meanwhile, American servicemen were personalizing their war machines in notably more cheerful ways. Aircrew's painted nose. Art of Disney characters on bombers at American bomber crews personalized their aircraft with elaborate nose art, transforming military hardware into flying canvases. Disney characters proved especially popular. Donald Duck, appearing angry and combat-ready, adorned countless planes. Mickey Mouse, Dumbo, Goofy, and characters from Bambi flew into combat. Walt Disney's studio actively supported this practice. In 1942, Disney created over 1,200 military insignia designs, free of charge, provided to units requesting them. Artists painted these characters directly onto aircraft fuselages, often adding unit mottos or mission tallies. The practice boosted morale, gave crews pride in their aircraft, and created individual identity within massive bomber formations. Not all nose art featured Disney. Pinup girls and fierce animals were equally common, though Disney characters offered wholesome alternatives that offended fewer sensibilities. Some commanders discouraged provocative imagery. Disney designs provided acceptable compromises. After the war, many aircraft were scrapped and their nose art lost. Surviving examples are now considered valuable pieces of military art history, documenting how soldiers humanized industrial warfare. While American crews decorated their bombers, Italian forces were experiencing their own dramatic rescue operation. Mussolini was rescued by glider commandos in a James Bond-style mission on July 25, 1943. Italy's fascist Grand Council deposed Benito Mussolini, imprisoning him in a remote mountain hotel atop Gran Sasso. Hitler refused to abandon his ally. He ordered Otto Skorzeny, an SS officer, to execute a rescue. Skorzeny planned Operation Eiche, Oak, one of World War II's most daring raids. On September 12, 1943, German commandos landed gliders directly on the narrow mountain plateau near Campo Imperatore Hotel. The surprise assault overwhelmed Italian guards without firing shots. Skorzeny had brought Italian General Fernando Soletti along, whose presence confused defenders about orders. Within minutes, Skorzeny found Mussolini and escorted him to a small Fieseler Storch aircraft. The tiny plane, dangerously overloaded with 2 passengers, barely cleared the cliff edge during takeoff. Mussolini was flown to Vienna, then to Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. The operation became legendary, showcasing special operations potential. Skorzeny became Germany's most famous commando, later involved in other dramatic operations, including the Battle of the Bulge. But behind the scenes of Hitler's regime, ordinary people faced extraordinary daily terrors. Hitler's food taster survived and told her story. Margot Volk was one of 15 young women forced to taste Hitler's food 3 times daily, ensuring it wasn't poisoned. In 1942, Volk fled Berlin's bombing to stay with relatives near Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters in East Prussia. SS officers discovered her presence and conscripted her as a food taster. Every meal, she and the other women ate the strictly vegetarian food Hitler preferred, then waited 45 minutes. If nobody died, Hitler ate. Volk lived in constant terror, never knowing if each bite would be her last. The women weren't allowed to speak about their work. Guards watched them constantly. Volk described the food as excellent: fresh vegetables, rice, pasta, but eating it was torture. In January 1945, as Soviet forces approached, Volk fled. She survived, though she believed the other 14 tasters were killed by Soviet soldiers. Volk kept silent about her experience for nearly 70 years, finally speaking publicly in 2013 at age 95. She died in 2014, having shared a unique and harrowing perspective on Hitler's paranoia. While Hitler feared poisoning, German submarine crews enjoyed surprising luxuries. German U-boats had bakers on board. German U-boat crews endured some of World War II's most claustrophobic conditions, spending months submerged in cramped, damp, dangerous submarines. Yet they enjoyed fresh bread daily, thanks to dedicated onboard bakers. Each submarine carried a qualified baker among its crew. Despite limited space and resources, bakers produced fresh bread throughout patrols, maintaining morale during extended missions. The smell of baking bread in the confined submarine became a comforting routine. U-boats carried special compact ovens and carefully rationed flour, yeast, and ingredients. Bakers worked in shifts, timing production around combat operations. Fresh bread wasn't mere luxury, It was psychological necessity. Submariners faced constant danger from depth charges, limited fresh air, mechanical failures, and enemy attacks. U-boat service had extraordinarily high casualty rates. Approximately 75% of German submariners died during the war. Small comforts like fresh bread helped crews endure prolonged stress. The German Navy recognized that morale directly impacted combat effectiveness. While Germans baked bread underwater, British intelligence was crafting even stranger methods of document authentication. Britain made fake documents using lice and fleas. British intelligence's document forgery division developed extraordinarily detailed techniques. Creating convincing fake identity papers required more than accurate printing. Documents needed realistic wear and aging. SOE's Section 15, responsible for supplying agents with fake documents, employed specialists who studied how genuine documents aged. They discovered that documents carried close to the body, developed specific wear patterns, and, importantly, could contain lice or flea eggs. Forgers intentionally introduced these parasites to documents, along with appropriate sweat stains, fiber wear, and edge damage. They crumpled papers repeatedly, exposed them to dirt, and aged inks chemically. Some documents were literally walked on, sat upon, or carried in shoes to create authentic wear. The attention to detail was obsessive. A too-perfect document would immediately arouse suspicion. German security officers were trained to spot forgeries, examining documents under magnification. A pristine identity paper on someone claiming to be a laborer would trigger investigation. Therefore, British forgers created documents that looked genuinely lived in, complete with biological authenticity. While Britain perfected forgery techniques, American engineers were attempting something even more audacious with frozen water. The U.S. built a floating airport out of ice. Project Habakkuk sounds impossible, an aircraft carrier made of ice. In 1942, British inventor Geoffrey Pike proposed constructing enormous, unsinkable ships from pykrete, a frozen mixture of water and wood pulp. Pykrete was stronger than regular ice, melted slowly, and could absorb damage from torpedoes. The ships would serve as mid-Atlantic refueling stations for aircraft, extending operational range. Winston Churchill loved the idea. In Canada's Patricia Lake, engineers built a prototype, a 60-foot-long, 1,000-ton ice ship. Construction began in 1943 using refrigeration units to maintain freezing temperatures. The prototype successfully demonstrated pykrete's properties. It remained frozen through an entire summer with minimal refrigeration. However, the full-scale ship would have required 2 million tons of ice, measuring 2,000 feet long and 300 feet wide. The project demanded enormous resources and time. By 1943, longer-range aircraft and escort carriers provided better solutions. The project was abandoned in 1944. The Patricia Lake prototype wasn't demolished. It slowly melted over months. Remnants of its refrigeration equipment still lie on the lake bottom. While Americans experimented with ice ships, Japan was launching actual attacks on American soil that few remember. A Japanese pilot bombed Oregon. During the war, Nobuo Fujita holds the distinction of being the only person to bomb the continental United States during World War II. On September 9, 1942, and again on September 29, Fujita flew a small floatplane launched from submarine I-25, dropping incendiary bombs on Oregon forests near Brookings. His mission was to start massive forest fires, diverting American resources. The plan failed. Recent rain had dampened forests, and the bombs caused only small fires quickly extinguished by lookouts. Americans kept the attacks quiet, denying Japan information about their success. Fujita dropped 4 bombs total across both missions. Remarkably, in 1962, Brookings invited Fujita back as a gesture of reconciliation. Deeply moved, he brought his family's 400-year-old samurai sword, intending to commit seppuku if Americans proved hostile. Instead, he received warm welcome. Fujita presented his sword to the city, becoming an honorary citizen. He visited 3 times, planted trees, and funded scholarships for American students to study in Japan. He died in 1997. Meanwhile, keeping soldiers awake for extended operations preoccupied military pharmacologists on all sides. Nazis used meth to keep soldiers awake. Pervitin, methamphetamine in pill form, became the Nazi military's secret weapon for alertness. Introduced in 1938, it was initially marketed as a consumer stimulant. The Wehrmacht quickly recognized its military applications. Between April and July 1940, the German military ordered over 35 million Pervitin tablets. Soldiers called them Stuka tablets or Panzerschokolade, tank chocolate. The drug eliminated fatigue, fear, and hunger while enhancing confidence and aggression. During the 1940 invasion of France, German troops advanced with superhuman speed, partly fueled by methamphetamine. Soldiers stayed awake for days, fighting continuously without rest. However, consequences were severe: addiction, psychosis, cardiovascular problems, and crashes. By 1941, military doctors recognized widespread addiction problems. The Wehrmacht attempted restricting Pervitin use, but frontline distribution continued throughout the war. Hitler himself received daily injections of various substances from his personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell, likely including methamphetamines. Post-war analysis of Morell's records suggests Hitler was severely drug-dependent. While German soldiers relied on chemical enhancement, Soviet women were proving their capabilities in combat through sheer skill and courage. The Soviet Union had all-female night bomber squadrons. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment was entirely female. Pilots, navigators, mechanics, and ground crew formed in 1941 under Major Marina Raskova. These women flew obsolete Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes, originally designed for crop dusting. These planes were wood and canvas, carrying no guns and minimal bombs. They flew low, cutting engines near targets and gliding silently before dropping bombs, earning the German nickname Nachthexen, night witches. The biplanes were so slow that German fighters struggled to engage them without stalling. The night witches flew multiple missions nightly, sometimes 15 to 18 sorties per night. They operated in all weather conditions, often in open cockpits at freezing temperatures. The regiment flew over 23,000 combat missions, dropping approximately 3,000 tons of bombs. 23 pilots received Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor. 30 pilots died in combat. The women faced skepticism and discrimination, but earned respect through extraordinary courage and effectiveness. Their success challenged gender assumptions about combat roles. Meanwhile, the Allies were preparing history's largest deception operation to ensure the invasion of France's success. The Allies made a fake invasion to trick Hitler on D-Day. Operation Fortitude was a masterpiece of deception designed to convince Hitler the main invasion would hit Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. The Allies created an entirely fictitious army group, 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, supposedly commanded by General George Patton and stationed in southeastern England. They constructed elaborate props, inflatable tanks, fake landing craft, dummy airfields with wooden planes, and false radio traffic. Double agents fed German intelligence false information about FUSAG's size and target. The Germans, respecting Patton's reputation, believed he'd lead the main assault. The deception was so thorough that even after D-Day on June 6, 1944, Hitler remained convinced Normandy was a feint. He held divisions in Pas-de-Calais for weeks, waiting for Patton's real invasion. This allowed Allied forces to establish their Normandy beachhead with reduced opposition. The operation involved thousands of personnel and countless details, from fake laundry hung at dummy camps to theatrical radio communications. Military historians consider Fortitude one of the most successful deception operations ever executed. And speaking of successful psychological operations, the OSS had considered even pettier methods of undermining Nazi morale. The U.S. Office of Strategic Services considered using stink bombs to humiliate Nazis. The OSS devoted surprising resources to humiliating Nazis through odor. Beyond the previously mentioned Who-Me compound, they developed multiple stench-based weapons. Who-Me was a sulfur-based solution smelling overwhelmingly of feces. The plan involved Chinese agents spraying Japanese officers or French resistance fighters targeting German officers. The idea was psychological. Publicly humiliated officers would lose subordinates' respect. OSS chemists, working at facilities including Stanley Lovell's division, created various formulations, testing them on unwilling subjects. One compound could penetrate clothing and couldn't be washed away for days. However, practical deployment proved problematic. Resistance fighters risked their lives for serious sabotage, not pranks. Additionally, triggering devices sometimes activated prematurely, causing agents to smell terrible instead of targets. Limited documentation exists regarding actual field use, though some sources suggest small-scale deployments in China. The OSS simultaneously developed serious weapons and these bizarre psychological tools, reflecting the anything-goes mentality of wartime intelligence operations. The agency's creativity knew few boundaries, whether productive or absurd. But not all wartime experiences were about combat. Even prisoners of war found ways to maintain humanity. German POWs in Texas were allowed to form orchestras and choirs. Texas held approximately 50,000 German POWs during World War II, housed in various camps across the state. Conditions were generally comfortable following Geneva Convention standards. Many camps allowed prisoners considerable freedom to pursue cultural activities. German POWs, many being well-educated, formed orchestras, choirs, and theater groups. At Camp Hearn, prisoners performed operas and symphonies. They built elaborate stages, created costumes from available materials, and performed for fellow prisoners and sometimes American guards. Some camps allowed prisoners to form sports teams, playing football and volleyball. Prisoners worked on nearby farms and ranches, earning small wages. Many Texans were surprised by prisoners' humanity. Some developed friendships despite being enemies. After the war, several German POWs chose to immigrate to the United States, settling in Texas where they had been imprisoned. Their cultural programs weren't unique to Texas. Camps nationwide encouraged such activities, believing occupied prisoners caused fewer problems. These programs also prepared prisoners for eventual reintegration into civilian life. While male prisoners filled camps, women on both sides were contributing to the war effort in increasingly crucial roles. Women worked as riveters, but also as spies and saboteurs. Rosie the Riveter symbolized women's factory work, but women's wartime contributions extended far beyond manufacturing. Women served as spies, saboteurs, resistance fighters, and intelligence analysts. Virginia Hall, an American working for Britain's SOE and later the OSS, operated in occupied France despite having a prosthetic leg. She organized resistance networks, transmitted intelligence, and evaded capture despite the Gestapo calling her the most dangerous of all Allied spies. Nancy Wake, an Australian, became a top agent leading thousands of French resistance fighters, personally killing German soldiers in combat. Soviet women served as snipers, pilots, and tank commanders. In Britain, women codebreakers at Bletchley Park, including Joan Clark, cracked German Enigma codes. Japanese-American women served as translators, intercepting enemy communications. Polish women fought in the Warsaw Uprising. Yugoslav partisans included thousands of women combatants, Women proved themselves in every conceivable role, though many contributions remained classified or unrecognized for decades. The war fundamentally changed perceptions about women's capabilities. Meanwhile, Hitler's own health was being managed through increasingly questionable medical practices. Hitler's doctor gave him daily injections of bull semen. Dr. Theodor Morell served as Hitler's personal physician from 1936 until the war's final days, administering increasingly bizarre treatments. Morell injected Hitler with dozens of substances, including vitamins, hormones, and animal extracts. Historical evidence suggests Morell used preparations containing bull semen and extracts from animal glands, believing they enhanced vitality and virility. These treatments reflected early 20th century organotherapy, now discredited medical theory suggesting consuming animal organs improved corresponding human organs. Morell gave Hitler injections multiple times daily, sometimes up to 20 injections per day by 1945. The exact compounds remain partially unknown. Morell's records show over 74 different substances prescribed. Medical historians analyzing surviving documentation believe Hitler received methamphetamines, opiates, steroids, and various animal extracts. By war's end, Hitler exhibited symptoms of drug dependency, experiencing tremors, paranoia, and physical deterioration. Morell became wealthy through Hitler's patronage, though other Nazi physicians considered him a quack. Hitler trusted Morell completely, refusing conventional medical advice. Meanwhile, Nazi pseudoscience extended beyond medicine to animal breeding programs with equally absurd goals. The Nazis tried to breed a master race of horses. Racial ideology extended beyond humans to animals. Hermann Göring, Hitler's designated successor and passionate huntsman, became obsessed with breeding Aryan horses. He attempted recreating extinct species that he believed represented Germanic purity. Göring funded expeditions to resurrect the tarpan, a wild horse extinct since the late 1800s. Using selective breeding with Polish Konik horses and other breeds, scientists attempted backbreeding the species. Similarly, Göring attempted recreating the aurochs, a giant extinct wild cattle species. Brothers Heinz and Lutz Heck, zoo directors, led these projects. They bred various cattle types, producing animals superficially resembling aurochs. Göring released these animals into Polish forests, intending to hunt them. These Heck cattle survive today in zoos and nature preserves. The projects reflected Nazi beliefs about racial purity and blood memory, the idea that racial characteristics could be recovered through selective breeding. Scientists criticized these programs as pseudoscientific vanity projects wasting resources. However, they proceeded with regime backing. While Göring bred horses, another Japanese soldier was beginning an even longer period of isolation than Hiroo Onoda. A Japanese soldier lived in the jungle for 29 years after the war. While Hiroo Onoda's story is well known, he wasn't alone. Teruo Nakamura, a Taiwanese-born soldier serving in the Japanese Imperial Army, holds the record for longest holdout. Deployed to Morotai Island in Indonesia during 1944, Nakamura continued hiding after Japan's surrender. Unlike Onoda, who conducted guerrilla operations, Nakamura simply survived, building a small hut and farming taro and bananas. He lived alone for 29 years, finally discovered by Indonesian Air Force pilots in December 1974. When found, Nakamura was nearly naked, living in extreme isolation. He was repatriated to Taiwan in 1975, where he faced an uncertain reception, technically no longer a Japanese citizen, as Taiwan's status had changed. Nakamura received back pay for his service, but struggled to reintegrate. He died in 1979. Unlike Onoda's dramatic surrender to his former commanding officer, Nakamura's discovery was quiet and sad, highlighting war's forgotten victims. But not all resistance fighters hid in jungles. Some fought using everyday objects transformed into weapons. The French resistance used bicycles as weapons of sabotage. French resistance fighters transformed ordinary bicycles into sabotage tools. Bicycles were perfect for resistance work, inconspicuous, silent, requiring no fuel, and arousing no suspicion. Resistance members used bicycles for surveillance, moving messages, transporting weapons, and executing attacks. They'd bicycle past German convoys, dropping magnetic mines. Women resistance fighters transported weapons in bicycle baskets covered with vegetables or laundry. One notable sabotage technique involved filling bicycle pumps with abrasive powder and using them on German military vehicles, destroying engines. Resistance members also sabotaged bicycle factory production destined for German forces. The Maquis organized elaborate courier networks, with cyclists traveling hundreds of kilometers carrying intelligence. German forces couldn't monitor every cyclist without paralyzing French daily life. After successful operations, resistance fighters disappeared into crowds of commuting workers. Bicycles also enabled quick escapes. Resistance members could abandon bicycles and blend into pedestrian traffic. The humble bicycle represented French ingenuity and determination, turning everyday transportation into resistance weapons. Meanwhile, Allied soldiers were finding creative uses for another everyday item issued in their ration kits. Allied soldiers used condoms to keep their rifles dry. Military-issued condoms served multiple purposes beyond their intended use. Allied soldiers discovered that condoms made excellent waterproof covers for rifle barrels, protecting weapons from rain, mud, and seawater during amphibious landings. The elastic latex fit snugly over barrel openings, keeping moisture and debris out while bullets could fire directly through them if necessary. This improvised technique became standard practice, especially in Pacific Island campaigns where troops regularly waded through water. Condoms also protected sensitive equipment, binocular lenses, watches, matchboxes, and even medical supplies. Soldiers could store paper money and documents inside them, creating waterproof pouches. Artillery crews used them to protect fuse mechanisms. The practice was so common that requisition requests for condoms dramatically exceeded what soldiers' personal needs would suggest. Military planners eventually acknowledged this alternative usage, sometimes providing condoms specifically for equipment protection. The technique continued in later conflicts, including Vietnam. While soldiers improvised above ground, British leadership was conducting the war from elaborate secret facilities. Churchill, though, had a secret underground war bunker with a private bed beneath London streets. The Cabinet War Room served as Britain's secret command center throughout the war. Constructed in 1938 and expanded throughout the conflict, this underground complex housed the War Cabinet, military commanders, and support staff. Winston Churchill maintained a private bedroom there, though he rarely used it, preferring to sleep above ground despite bombing risks. The bunker included cabinet meeting rooms, map rooms tracking every military operation worldwide, communications equipment, and living quarters for essential personnel. The complex operated 24 hours daily throughout the war. The map room was never closed from its opening on August 27, 1939, until victory in Europe. Staff tracked convoy movements, troop deployments, and battle progress with colored pins and markers. Churchill made many famous broadcasts from these rooms. The facility included a direct telephone hotline to President Roosevelt, disguised as a bathroom. The war rooms were abandoned immediately after Japan's surrender, then sealed and forgotten until 1984, when they opened as a museum. Walking through them today feels like stepping into 1945. While Churchill directed strategy underground, American military educators were addressing a different kind of wartime threat. The U.S. used comic books to teach soldiers about venereal disease. The U.S. military faced a serious problem. Venereal disease rates among servicemen threatened combat readiness. Traditional medical lectures proved ineffective. The solution was unconventional, educational comic books. The military commissioned illustrated booklets using comic art styles to deliver serious health messages. These publications, distributed to millions of servicemen, featured cartoon characters demonstrating proper hygiene, warning about disease transmission, and encouraging prophylactic use. One famous series featured VD as a sinister enemy character allied with Axis powers, literally attacking American soldiers. The comics mixed humor with shocking medical imagery, showing disease consequences graphically enough to frighten soldiers into caution. Titles included She Looked Clean and featured femme fatale characters personifying disease threats. While seemingly crude, these comics proved remarkably effective. Infection rates decreased following their distribution. The approach recognized that young servicemen responded better to visual, entertaining education than dry medical texts. Other militaries noticed. Similar programs appeared worldwide. The comics represented an innovative public health campaign disguised as entertainment. Meanwhile, German engineers were developing remotely controlled weapons that seemed decades ahead of their time. The Germans had a machine called the Goliath, a remote-controlled tank bomb. The Goliath tracked mine was essentially a remote-controlled bomb on treads. Developed in 1942, this small unmanned vehicle measured about 4 feet long, carried 60 to 100 kilograms of high explosives, and was controlled via a cable spool. An operator steered the Goliath toward targets, bunkers, tanks, or infantry positions, then detonated it remotely. The concept was innovative, but execution proved problematic. Goliaths were expensive, slow, vulnerable to small arms fire, and the control cable could be severed easily. They performed poorly in rough terrain. The Wehrmacht produced approximately 7,500 units, but they saw limited success. Allied soldiers nicknamed them doodlebugs. Goliaths were most effective during the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, where Germans used them to destroy buildings hiding Polish resistance fighters. The concept predated modern military drones and remote-controlled robots by decades, though technology wasn't ready for the idea. After the war, captured Goliaths influenced Soviet and American remote-controlled vehicle research. They represented German innovation and desperation simultaneously. While Germans sent remote-controlled bombs, Soviet snipers were employing psychological warfare through an unexpected object. Soviet snipers set traps using teddy bears. Soviet snipers developed psychological tactics beyond pure marksmanship. Among their methods was using objects designed to attract curious or compassionate enemy soldiers. Accounts from the Eastern Front describe snipers placing teddy bears, dolls, or other innocent-seeming objects in no man's land, or bombed buildings. When German soldiers approached to investigate or collect souvenirs, the sniper would shoot. Some versions describe bears rigged as booby traps, others involve snipers simply using them as bait. The effectiveness was psychological. These objects reminded soldiers of home, children, and peacetime, triggering emotional responses that momentarily lowered guards. The practice exploited human curiosity and compassion. However, historical documentation of this specific tactic remains limited. Many accounts come from memoirs and oral histories rather than official military records. Whether widespread or occasional, such tactics represented the brutal psychological dimensions of Eastern Front combat, where both sides employed every conceivable method to kill efficiently. The war's brutality created strange juxtapositions, and speaking of unexpected historical connections, two famous figures shared a surprising commonality. Anne Frank and Martin Luther King Jr. were born in the same year. Anne Frank and Martin Luther King Jr. were both born in 1929, a coincidence that powerfully illustrates how recent these historical events remain. Anne was born June 12th in Frankfurt, Germany. Martin was born January 15th in Atlanta, Georgia. Both would become iconic figures representing struggles against oppression and injustice, though their lives took dramatically different paths. Anne died in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in February 1945 at age 15, just weeks before liberation. Her diary became one of the Holocaust's most powerful testimonies. Martin survived to lead the American Civil Rights Movement, delivering his famous I Have a Dream speech in 1963 before his assassination in 1968 at age 39. Their shared birth year reminds us that World War II isn't ancient history. It occurred within living memory. People who were children during the war are now elderly but still alive, carrying firsthand memories. These connections make history tangible and immediate, rather than abstract and distant. Meanwhile, Saga, some wartime heroes came from the most unexpected backgrounds imaginable. One of the most successful spies was a Spanish chicken farmer, Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo by the British, was perhaps World War II's most successful double agent, yet he began as a Spanish chicken farmer with no intelligence experience. Hating fascism after the Spanish Civil War, Pujol approached British intelligence offering to spy. They rejected him. Undeterred, he convinced Germans he was a Spanish official traveling to Britain, becoming a German agent. From Portugal, he created fictional intelligence reports about Britain using travel guides and newsreels, inventing an entire network of imaginary sub-agents. His fabrications were so convincing that the Germans paid him generously. Eventually, British intelligence noticed German responses to non-existent intelligence and realized someone was successfully deceiving them. They recruited Pujol, codenamed him Garbo, and used his German trust to feed disinformation. Pujol's fictional agent network provided false intelligence supporting Operation Fortitude before D-Day. Germans believed his report that Normandy was a feint, holding divisions away from the actual invasion. Both Germany and Britain awarded Pujol medals. He's one of few people decorated by both sides. After the war, he faked his death and lived quietly in Venezuela. And speaking of unlikely trajectories, Hitler's path to dictatorship began with artistic rejection. Hitler was a failed artist before becoming a dictator. Adolf Hitler aspired to be a professional artist. Born in 1889 in Austria, Hitler applied twice to Vienna's Academy of Fine Arts in 1907 and 1908, and was rejected both times. Examiners found his technical skills adequate for architectural drawing, but insufficient for artistic painting. They suggested he pursue architecture instead. Hitler lacked the formal education required for architectural school. These rejections devastated him. He spent years in Vienna living in homeless shelters, selling postcards and small paintings for minimal income. His artwork was competent but uninspired. Mostly architectural scenes and landscapes painted with technical precision but little emotional depth. Hitler blamed Jews for his failures, developing the anti-Semitic ideology that would later define Nazi policy. After World War I, he entered politics, discovering his true talent: public speaking and demagoguery. His artistic failure directly shaped his worldview and resentments. Hundreds of Hitler's paintings survive today, occasionally appearing at auctions where they sell for controversial prices despite their mediocre quality. While Hitler painted mediocre watercolors, Allied forces were attempting a different kind of psychological operation through paper bombardment. Allied bombers dropped leaflets warning civilians before attacks. Allied air forces conducted extensive leaflet campaigns throughout the war, dropping billions of papers over enemy territory. Some leaflets warned civilians about upcoming bombing raids, though this practice was controversial and inconsistent. In the Pacific Theater, American aircraft dropped leaflets over Japanese cities warning residents to evacuate before firebombing campaigns. Leaflets listed target cities, urging civilian departure. However, these warnings were sometimes vague, listed multiple cities, or came after bombing had begun. The practice served multiple purposes. It could reduce civilian casualties, created panic, and undermined morale, and provided psychological justification for bombing campaigns. In Europe, leaflets targeted both civilians and military personnel. Millions urged German soldiers to surrender. explaining how to do so safely. Others contained propaganda undermining Nazi ideology. The Germans also dropped leaflets over Allied territory. Effectiveness varied. Some civilians evacuated, while others dismissed leaflets as propaganda. Post-war analysis showed that leaflet campaigns did influence civilian morale and occasionally encouraged military desertions. They represented psychological warfare's role alongside conventional bombing. And in a lighter note about wartime Washington, even pets became part of the propaganda machine. FDR's dog had his own press secretary, Fala. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's black Scottish Terrier became one of America's most famous dogs. Roosevelt received Fala in 1940 as a gift, and the dog became his constant companion. Fala attended meetings, traveled with Roosevelt, and appeared in photographs and newsreels. The dog became so famous that rumors circulated about his special treatment. Political opponents claimed Roosevelt had sent a destroyer to retrieve Fala after supposedly leaving him in the Aleutian Islands, wasting taxpayer money. These accusations were false, but forced Roosevelt to defend himself. In his famous 1944 Fala speech, Roosevelt humorously addressed the attacks. These Republican leaders have not been content with attacks on me, or my wife, or on my sons. No, not content with that. They now include my little dog, Fala. The speech was devastatingly effective, using humor to deflect criticism. Fala effectively did have handlers managing his public appearances and press interactions, making him arguably the most managed presidential pet in history. After Roosevelt's death in 1945, Fala attended his funeral and lived with Eleanor Roosevelt until dying in 1952. The British plotted to assassinate Hitler with explosive devices. British intelligence developed numerous schemes to assassinate Hitler throughout the war. Operation Foxley, planned in 1944, involved shooting Hitler during his morning walk at the Berghof, his Bavarian retreat. Special operations executive agents studied his routines meticulously, noting he walked to a tea house at the same time daily with minimal security. Snipers would hide in nearby woods. However, the operation was never executed. British leadership ultimately decided Hitler's poor military judgment was actually helping the Allied cause. His interference often overruled capable German generals, leading to strategic mistakes. Killing Hitler might result in more competent military leadership taking over. The British also developed explosive chocolates and other booby-trapped items intended for Hitler, though none reached him. These assassination plots remained highly classified until documents were declassified decades later. The decision not to kill Hitler when opportunities existed remains controversial among historians. While British intelligence plotted assassinations, Nazi scientists were conducting unspeakably cruel experiments that revealed the regime's absolute moral bankruptcy. Nazi scientists experimented with time perception in concentration camps. Among the many horrific experiments conducted in concentration camps, Nazi scientists studied human time perception under extreme conditions. At Dachau, prisoners were subjected to experiments testing how long humans could survive in extreme cold. Researchers documented how hypothermia affected consciousness and time sense. Dr. Sigmund Rascher conducted these experiments, immersing prisoners in ice water for hours, while measuring vital signs and cognitive responses, including their ability to track time passing. The experiments had no legitimate scientific value. They were torture disguised as research. Similar experiments tested altitude tolerance, deliberately causing fatal decompression while recording victims' experiences. These experiments violated every medical and ethical standard, treating human beings as laboratory animals. After the war, the Nuremberg trials prosecuted Nazi doctors for these crimes. The trials established the Nuremberg Code, defining ethical standards for human experimentation that remain fundamental to medical ethics today. While Nazi scientists committed atrocities, American women were breaking barriers in aviation, though their contributions would go unrecognized for decades. Women pilots in the US military flew bombers but weren't recognized until decades later. The Women Air Force Service Pilots, known as WASP, served from 1942 to 1944, flying military aircraft for the US Army Air Forces. Over 1,000 women pilots ferried bombers and fighters from factories to military bases, towed targets for gunnery practice, transported cargo, and test flew repaired aircraft. They flew every aircraft type the military used, including B-29 Superfortresses and P-51 Mustangs. 38 WASP pilots died during service. Despite their contributions, they weren't considered military personnel and received no benefits. Families had to pay to ship their daughters' bodies home. When WASP was disbanded in December 1944, the women received no recognition or veterans' benefits. Not until 1977 did Congress grant WASP veterans status. In 2010, surviving WASP members received the Congressional Gold Medal. These women proved that female pilots could handle military aircraft as competently as men, paving the way for women in military aviation. Meanwhile, Nazi leadership was allegedly planning an audacious strike against Allied leadership. There was an alleged Nazi plan to assassinate Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. Operation Long Jump supposedly involved Nazi commandos parachuting into Tehran during the 1943 Tehran Conference to assassinate Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin simultaneously. Soviet intelligence claimed to have discovered and thwarted the plot. However, historians debate whether this operation actually existed. Soviet sources described elaborate plans involving German special forces led by Otto Skorzeny, the officer who rescued Mussolini. According to these accounts, the Soviets arrested German agents in Tehran and prevented the assassination. However, German records contain no evidence of such an operation, and Skorzeny himself denied involvement. Some historians believe the Soviets fabricated or exaggerated the plot to increase Stalin's importance and demonstrate Soviet intelligence capabilities. Others argue limited evidence suggests some German reconnaissance occurred. The truth remains unclear. What's certain is that the Tehran Conference proceeded successfully in November 1943, with the three Allied leaders meeting to plan strategy. Whether they narrowly escaped assassination or the threat never existed continues to be debated. While the reality of Nazi assassination plots remains murky, American propaganda efforts were very real and surprisingly animated. The US made propaganda films starring Bugs Bunny and Donald Duck. American animation studios contributed significantly to wartime propaganda. Walt Disney Studios produced over 68 hours of war-related content, including training films and propaganda shorts. Donald Duck starred in Der Führer's Face in 1943, depicting Donald's nightmare of living under Nazi rule, working in a munitions factory. The film won an Academy Award and became hugely popular. Warner Brothers contributed Bugs Bunny cartoons mocking Axis powers. Hair Meets Hair showed Bugs outsmarting Hermann Goering. Private Snafu, a character created specifically for military training films, appeared in shorts teaching soldiers about security, hygiene, and military procedures. These cartoons, directed by Chuck Jones and other legendary animators, were shown exclusively to troops. They addressed serious topics: venereal disease, loose lips, and battlefield tactics, using humor and animation's visual clarity. The military recognized that servicemen, many barely out of their teens, responded better to animated instruction than dry lectures. These cartoons were remarkably effective training tools. Meanwhile, Britain's Prime Minister was perfecting his own performance art, the political speech. Winston Churchill practiced speeches in front of a mirror. Winston Churchill's legendary oratory didn't come naturally. It resulted from meticulous preparation and practice. Despite his eventual mastery, Churchill suffered from a speech impediment and lisp as a child. He worked tirelessly to overcome these challenges. Churchill wrote every speech carefully, practicing delivery repeatedly. He rehearsed in front of mirrors, perfecting gestures, facial expressions, and timing. His secretaries reported that he'd practiced the same speech multiple times, adjusting emphasis and pauses. Churchill understood that effective public speaking required more than good writing. Delivery mattered enormously. He studied his own body language and facial expressions, ensuring they reinforced his words. His famous speeches, "We shall fight on the beaches," their finest hour, blood, toil, tears, and sweat, were carefully crafted performances. Churchill also practiced vocal techniques to project his voice effectively. His attention to detail transformed him into one of history's greatest orators. This dedication to communication helped rally British morale during the darkest days of the war. While Churchill practiced speeches, British children were contributing to the war effort in their own essential way. British school children collected rose hips for vitamin C during wartime shortages. Britain's wartime blockade made importing citrus fruits nearly impossible, creating vitamin C deficiency concerns. The solution came from an unexpected source: rose hips, the fruit of wild rose plants. Rose hips contain significantly more vitamin C than oranges. In 1941, the British government organized a national campaign encouraging children to collect rose hips from hedgerows and countryside. Schools participated, with children gathering millions of pounds of rose hips annually. The government paid collectors, giving children pocket money while supporting the war effort. Collected hips were processed into rose hip syrup, distributed free to children through the national health system. Over 450 tons were collected in 1943 alone. The syrup tasted reasonably pleasant and effectively prevented scurvy. This program represented the creativity required to maintain nutrition during wartime scarcity. It also gave children meaningful contribution to victory, fostering community spirit. The program continued beyond the war, becoming part of British culture. And speaking of pre-war events that foreshadowed the conflict, the world had witnessed Nazi Germany's propaganda machine on full display just 3 years before invasion. The Nazi Olympics were held just 3 years before. War broke out. The 1936 Berlin Olympics served as a massive propaganda showcase for Nazi Germany. Hitler intended to demonstrate Aryan superiority through athletic competition. Germany invested heavily in facilities, creating an impressive Olympic complex. The regime temporarily removed anti-Semitic signage and moderated public persecution to present a civilized image to international visitors. However, Nazi racial ideology permeated the games. Hitler refused to congratulate Jesse Owens, the African-American athlete who won 4 gold medals, contradicting Nazi racial theories. Despite the regime's intentions, Owens's triumph became one of the Olympics' most memorable stories. The Games normalized Nazi Germany internationally, suggesting it was a legitimate, modern nation rather than a dangerous dictatorship. Many historians argue that international participation gave Hitler diplomatic credibility. Just 3 years later, in September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, beginning World War II. The Berlin Olympics represented a missed opportunity for international community to isolate and pressure Nazi Germany before war became inevitable. While the Olympics showcased Nazi Germany's public face, Hitler's personal relationship with Paris revealed different complexities. Hitler visited Konkeker Terrace only once in a brief morning tour. Adolf Hitler entered Paris on June 23, 1940, shortly after France's surrender. His visit was surprisingly brief, just 3 hours in the early morning. Accompanied by architect Albert Speer and sculptor Arno Breker, Hitler toured iconic landmarks: the Opera House, the Eiffel Tower, Les Invalides, where Napoleon was entombed, and the Arc de Triomphe. The visit began at 5:30 a.m., deliberately early to avoid crowds. Hitler had long admired Paris's architecture and studied the city's layout extensively. Despite his admiration, he never returned. Some historians suggest he found Paris's beauty intimidating, or that he wanted to preserve his romantic image of the city rather than see it as a occupied territory. Others argue military priorities simply prevented further visits. Hitler ordered General Dietrich von Koltitz to destroy Paris during the August 1944 retreat, but Koltitz disobeyed. Paris survived intact. Hitler's single visit remains historically significant. It marked the Nazi Empire's apex, yet hinted at the cultured civilization Germany was destroying. Meanwhile, animal heroism during the war continued to earn recognition. A pigeon won the animal equivalent of the Victoria Cross. The Dickin Medal, established in 1943 by Maria Dickin, recognized animal bravery during wartime. Often called the Animals Victoria Cross, it honored extraordinary courage by animals serving military or civil defense. 32 pigeons received the Dickin Medal during World War II, more than any other animal type. One recipient, Cher Ami, actually served in World War I, but continued inspiring World War II pigeon services. During World War II, pigeons like Gustav delivered first news of D-Day success, flying over 100 miles in 5 hours. Paddy flew the fastest recorded time with Normandy invasion updates. William of Orange completed missions despite injuries. These birds carried messages when radio silence was necessary or equipment failed. They flew through enemy fire, storms, and exhaustion. Pigeons saved thousands of lives by delivering critical intelligence and distress calls. Their success rate was remarkable. Approximately 95% completed missions successfully. After the war, many medal-winning pigeons lived out their lives in relative comfort, honored for their service. But not all wartime courage involved animals. Human resistance sometimes required desperate measures. Some Jewish prisoners escaped concentration camps through tunnels. Concentration camp escapes were extraordinarily difficult but occasionally successful. Sobibor extermination camp witnessed one of history's most successful revolts. On October 14, 1943, Jewish prisoners killed 11 SS officers and Ukrainian guards, then escaped. Approximately 300 prisoners fled. About 50 survived the war. The uprising was meticulously planned by Leon Feldhendler and Alexander Pechersky, a Soviet Jewish POW. In Auschwitz, Rudolf Verba and Alfred Wetzler escaped in April 1944 by hiding in a woodpile outside the camp perimeter for 3 days, then traveling to Slovakia. Their detailed report, the Verba-Wetzler report, provided the first comprehensive account of Auschwitz's operations, informing the world about the industrial nature of Holocaust killings. Other camps saw tunnel escapes. At Janowska camp, prisoners dug a tunnel over several months, though most escapees were recaptured. These escapes required immense courage, coordination, and luck. Captured escapees faced torture and execution. Each successful escape represented triumph of human spirit over unimaginable evil. While real prisoners tunneled to freedom, the Allies were creating elaborate fakes for deception. The Allies floated rubber corpses for deception missions. Operation Mincemeat's success using a corpse for deception inspired similar efforts. The Allies developed rubber dummy corpses for various deception operations. These realistic props appeared in photographs of casualties or were planted to mislead enemy intelligence. During D-Day preparations, rubber dummies weren't just tanks, they included false casualties. Inflatable corpses were photographed to suggest previous assault failures, discouraging German defensive preparations in certain areas. The dummies were remarkably detailed, with appropriate uniforms and equipment. Some deception operations involved floating dummy corpses near coastlines to suggest botched infiltration attempts, drawing German attention away from actual landing sites. The Allies also dropped dummy paratroopers, devices called Ruperts or paradummies, rigged with firecrackers simulating gunfire. These created the illusion of airborne assaults far from actual operations. On D-Day night, Hundreds of dummy paratroopers dropped away from real landing zones, confusing German defenders about Allied intentions. The combination of rubber props, sound effects, and false radio traffic created convincing phantom armies. Meanwhile, real wartime diplomacy was creating alliances that would shape the post-war world. Roosevelt met with Saudi royalty on a U.S. warship in a secret oil deal. Following the Yalta Conference in February 1945, President Franklin D. Roosevelt made a historic detour. On February 14th, aboard the USS Quincy, anchored in Egypt's Great Bitter Lake, Roosevelt met King Abdul Aziz ibn Saud of Saudi Arabia. This meeting established the foundation of the U.S.-Saudi relationship that continues today. Roosevelt sought assurances about Saudi oil access, crucial for post-war planning. Ibn Saud arrived with an entourage of dozens, including sheep for fresh food, which were slaughtered on the destroyer escort accompanying him. The king refused to sleep below deck, so crew erected a tent on deck. Despite cultural and political differences, Roosevelt and Ibn Saud developed mutual respect. Roosevelt sought Ibn Saud's support for Jewish immigration to Palestine, but the king firmly opposed this. The meeting established principles: American technical assistance and military protection in exchange for oil access. This arrangement would profoundly shape Middle Eastern politics and global energy markets for decades. Roosevelt died just 2 months later, but the relationship he initiated endured. While diplomacy shaped the future, Nazi medical crimes continued revealing the regime's depravity. Nazis used X-rays to sterilize prisoners. Nazi eugenics programs included mass sterilization experiments aimed at eliminating undesirable populations. At Auschwitz, Dr. Horst Schumann conducted radiation sterilization experiments on hundreds of prisoners. Men and women were subjected to high doses of X-ray radiation directed at their reproductive organs. The procedures were excruciatingly painful, caused severe burns, and frequently proved fatal. Survivors suffered permanent damage, infections, and various cancers. These experiments had no legitimate medical purpose. They sought efficient methods for mass sterilization of entire populations. Dr. Victor Braque proposed sterilizing 2 to 3 million Jews through radiation, suggesting victims could be processed while filling out paperwork, unknowingly receiving sterilizing radiation through modified windows. These proposals represented the Holocaust's bureaucratic, industrialized approach to genocide. After the war, the Nuremberg doctors' trial prosecuted Nazi physicians for these crimes. Schumann escaped initially but was eventually captured, extradited to Germany, and tried. These experiments exemplified how Nazi ideology corrupted medicine, transforming healing professions into instruments of murder. Meanwhile, even mundane military training reflected how total warfare influenced every aspect of life. German officers were taught tactical measurement techniques. German military training emphasized practical field skills, including estimating distances without instruments. Officers learned to use everyday objects as measurement references. A man's stride, handspan, and body height provided consistent measurements. Bread rations, standardized at specific sizes, could serve as measurement units in field conditions when proper instruments were unavailable. The German military prized improvisation and practical problem-solving. Soldiers learned to estimate artillery ranges, distances to enemy positions, and map coordinates using various techniques. The famous German military maps were detailed and accurate, but field conditions often prevented direct consultation. Therefore, training emphasized mental calculation and estimation. German officers also learned to navigate using natural features, sun position, and star patterns. This emphasis on practical skills without technology meant German forces could operate effectively, even when equipment failed. These techniques proved valuable during the chaotic Eastern Front campaigns, where conditions destroyed equipment regularly. Similar practical training appeared in all armies, reflecting how soldiers adapted to warfare's unpredictable nature. But after the war ended, some Nazis escaped justice through a disturbing network. The Vatican secretly helped some Nazis escape. After World War II, networks called rat lines helped Nazi war criminals escape Europe. The Vatican's involvement remains controversial and documented. Bishop Alois Hudal, rector of the Pontificio Istituto Teutonico in Rome, actively assisted Nazi fugitives obtaining false papers and passage to South America. Hudal believed anti-communism justified helping former Nazis. He operated with knowledge of Vatican officials. Though the Vatican's exact institutional involvement remains debated, Franz Stangl, Treblinka commandant, escaped using Vatican assistance. Adolf Eichmann, architect of the Holocaust, used similar networks to reach Argentina. Croatian priest Krunoslav Draganovic operated another major rat line helping Croatian fascist Ustaša members escape. The International Committee of the Red Cross, perhaps naively, issued travel documents based on false identities provided by rat line operators. These networks helped thousands escape justice. The Vatican's role caused lasting scandal. Pope Pius XII's actions during and after the war remain intensely debated. Some defend him as working within impossible constraints. Others accuse him of moral failure. While some Nazis escaped, resistance fighters had used creative methods to coordinate their efforts. Soldiers sent coded messages through crossword puzzles. The French resistance and other underground movements developed creative communication methods. Coded messages appeared in newspaper crossword puzzles, seemingly innocent yet containing vital intelligence. Resistance networks would publish puzzles with specific solutions spelling messages. Leonard Daw, who created Daily Telegraph crosswords, inadvertently caused security concerns before D-Day. In May 1944, his puzzles contained words like Utah, Omaha, Juneau, codenames for D-Day beaches. British intelligence investigated, suspecting a leak. They determined it was extraordinary coincidence. Daw had asked students to suggest words, and students had overheard soldiers using these code names. Genuine coded crossword messages worked through predetermined keys. Resistance members would solve puzzles, then extract every third letter or use specific numbered squares to reveal messages. Newspapers printed these innocently, as censors couldn't detect patterns without keys. This method was slow but reliable. The Germans occasionally suspected such methods existed, but couldn't monitor every publication's crosswords without knowing specific keys. Meanwhile, Soviet military engineering was solving more immediate practical problems on the battlefield. Soviet tanks used logs to self-extract from mud. Soviet tanks operating on the Eastern Front faced nightmarish terrain. The Rasputitsa, or mud season, transformed roads into impassable quagmires during spring thaw and autumn rains. German forces, unfamiliar with Russian conditions, became hopelessly bogged down. Soviet tanks carried unditching logs, long timber beams attached to hull exteriors. When stuck in mud, crews would chain the log across the drive wheels. As wheels rotated, the log provided traction, essentially creating a temporary firm surface allowing the tank to climb out. The technique was ingenious and low-tech, requiring no special equipment beyond chains and logs. The logs also served other purposes, reinforcing defensive positions, bridging small gaps, or providing firewood. Other armies adopted similar techniques after observing Soviet success. American and British forces used logs and fascines, bundles of sticks, for similar purposes. These simple solutions often proved more reliable than complex engineering equipment. The Eastern Front's vast spaces and poor infrastructure meant tanks frequently operated far from recovery vehicles. Self-recovery capability was essential. While Soviet soldiers hauled logs, American children were collecting different materials entirely. American children collected tin and bacon fat for the war effort. American home front mobilization involved entire families, including children. Scrap drives collected materials needed for war production. Children gathered tin cans, aluminum foil, rubber, newspapers, and scrap metal. They went door to door, pulling wagons filled with collected materials to collection centers. Schools organized competitions between classrooms or schools, motivating children to gather more. The campaigns taught children about patriotic duty and war support. Bacon fat collection was particularly important. Households saved cooking grease in containers, which children brought to butchers or collection points. The fat was processed into glycerin, essential for manufacturing explosives. 1 pound of fat provided enough glycerin for several bullets. Propaganda posters encouraged these efforts with slogans like, "Save waste fats, make explosives." While the actual military value of some collected materials was questionable, some aluminum foil quantities were too contaminated for reuse. The psychological value was enormous. These drives gave civilians, especially children, tangible ways to contribute to victory. The campaigns fostered national unity and shared sacrifice. While American children collected scraps, British commandos were using miniaturized technology. British commandos carried miniature communication devices. British special operations required compact, concealable equipment. SOE developed remarkable miniaturized tools, including tiny radios. While not quite fitting in matchboxes, some radio components were extraordinarily small for the era. The Paraset spy radio, developed for SOE agents, weighed only 7 pounds and fit in a small case. It could transmit and receive messages over substantial distances. SOE also developed miniaturized cameras, including the Matchbox camera, a sub-miniature camera actually fitting in matchboxes. These cameras, also called microdot cameras, photographed documents for intelligence gathering. Commandos carried explosive devices disguised as ordinary objects: coal lumps, wine bottles, logs, and, yes, various container sizes that could include cigarette packages or similar small containers. While full radios didn't fit in matchboxes, the technology was remarkably compact for 1940s standards. SOE's Station 9 at Welwyn developed hundreds of specialized devices. These gadgets seem like James Bond fiction, but were genuine wartime equipment. The miniaturization represented cutting-edge technology, later inspiring Cold War spy equipment. Meanwhile, some German officers made unexpected moral choices in the war's final days. A Nazi general saved Paris from destruction. General Dietrich von Koltitz served as military governor of Paris in August 1944. Hitler ordered him to destroy the city completely before Allied liberation, demolishing bridges, monuments, power stations, and buildings. Explosives were prepared at landmarks including the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame, and Louvre. Hitler reportedly asked, "Is Paris burning?" expecting confirmation of the city's destruction. Von Koltitz disobeyed. On August 25th, he surrendered Paris intact to French and American forces. His motivations remain debated. His memoir, Is Paris Burning?, suggests moral awakening, but historians note more pragmatic factors. German military position was hopeless. Destroying Paris would be pointless vengeance. Von Koltitz also likely realized he'd face war crimes prosecution for destroying a world cultural treasure. Nevertheless, his disobedience saved irreplaceable architecture and countless civilian lives. Paris stands today because von Koltitz chose to ignore orders. After the war, he was briefly held as a POW but was not prosecuted for war crimes. His decision remains one of history's fortunate instances where an officer's judgment prevailed over criminal orders. While von Koltitz saved Paris, Japan was undermining Chinese economy through different means. Japan printed counterfeit Chinese money to fund their invasion during the Second Sino-Japanese War, beginning in 1937. Japan employed economic warfare alongside military campaigns. Japanese forces printed massive quantities of counterfeit Chinese currency, flooding occupied territories with fake yuan. This counterfeiting served multiple purposes: It funded Japanese military operations by purchasing supplies with worthless paper. It destabilized Chinese economy by causing hyperinflation, and it undermined Chinese government legitimacy as citizens lost faith in their currency. The operation was extensive and sophisticated, using high-quality printing, producing nearly indistinguishable counterfeits. Tons of counterfeit currency circulated throughout Chinese territories. The economic chaos this created weakened Chinese resistance as prices skyrocketed and savings became worthless. This represented total war economic strategy. Attacking enemy economy was as important as military victories. Other nations employed similar tactics. Germany counterfeited British pounds in Operation Bernhard, using concentration camp labor to produce fake currency, hoping to destabilize British economy. These economic warfare campaigns showed that 20th century total war extended beyond battlefields to financial systems. Meanwhile, pre-war political alliances between Nazi Germany and American industrialists revealed troubling connections. Hitler admired Henry Ford, and Ford returned the favor. Adolf Hitler admired Henry Ford's anti-Semitic writings and industrial achievements. Ford published The International Jew, a 4-volume work promoting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, in the early 1920s. The Dearborn Independent, Ford's newspaper, regularly printed anti-Jewish articles. German translations circulated widely in 1920s Germany. Hitler kept Ford's portrait in his office and mentioned Ford favorably in Mein Kampf. In 1938, Ford received the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, Nazi Germany's highest honor for foreigners, awarded on his 75th birthday. Ford accepted the medal causing considerable controversy in America. Ford's factories in Germany, operating as Ford Werke, produced military vehicles for the Wehrmacht during the war. After Pearl Harbor, Ford claimed he had no control over the German subsidiary, though this claim remains disputed. The relationship between Ford and Nazi Germany illustrates complex connections between American industry and fascist regimes before the war. Ford later expressed regret about his anti-Semitic publications, but the damage was done. His writings had provided intellectual ammunition for Nazi ideology. While Ford's portrait hung in Hitler's office, American soldiers carried different kinds of images altogether. U.S. soldiers carried pinup calendars into battle. Pinup art became iconic imagery of World War II home front and military culture. Soldiers plastered pinup photographs on barracks walls, inside lockers, and on aircraft fuselages. Pinup calendars featuring actresses like Betty Grable, Rita Hayworth, and Veronica Lake deployed with millions of servicemen. Betty Grable's famous bathing suit photograph, showing her looking over her shoulder, became the war's most popular pinup, with over 5 million copies distributed. The military officially sanctioned pinups, recognizing their morale value. They reminded servicemen of what they were fighting for: home, normalcy, and American culture. Pinup art wasn't considered controversial during the war. It was wholesome compared to modern standards. The images combined beauty with innocence, representing idealized American womanhood. Military publications like Yank magazine featured pinups alongside news and cartoons. Some religious groups criticized pinups as inappropriate, but military leadership dismissed these concerns. The imagery became so iconic that pinup art influenced post-war advertising, fashion, and popular culture for decades. Today, wartime pinups are collectible nostalgia, representing the era's distinct aesthetic. But while pinups decorated walls, serious intellectual work was breaking Nazi Germany's most important secret. The Enigma code was broken by mathematicians and crossword experts. Bletchley Park, Britain's code-breaking center, employed approximately 9,000 people at its peak. The team that broke German Enigma encryption included mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, and notably crossword puzzle experts. In January 1942, the Daily Telegraph published a challenge: complete their crossword in under 12 minutes. This was actually a recruitment test. Successful solvers received mysterious invitations to attend interviews. Crossword solving required pattern recognition, lateral thinking, and persistence, exactly the skills needed for code breaking. Alan Turing, the brilliant mathematician, led theoretical work designing the bombing machines that automated part of the decryption process, but human analysts were essential for interpreting decrypted messages and recognizing patterns. Polish mathematicians had earlier made crucial breakthroughs before the war, providing foundations for British efforts. The Bletchley Park team's success gave Allies unprecedented intelligence access, reading German military communications throughout the war. Churchill later said the codebreakers shortened the war by at least 2 years. Their work remained classified until the 1970s, denying them public recognition for decades. While mathematicians broke codes, musicians were contributing to a different kind of disruption. Allied forces used music to disrupt Nazi communications. Allied psychological warfare included radio broadcasting aimed at undermining enemy morale. The Allies operated numerous propaganda radio stations broadcasting into Axis territories. These stations played American jazz and swing music, which the Nazi regime had banned as degenerate and racially inferior. The music appealed to young Germans tired of Nazi cultural restrictions. Some broadcasts mixed music with propaganda messages and disinformation. Radio Luxembourg and other Allied-controlled stations became popular, despite being illegal to listen to in Germany. The appeal of forbidden American music, especially jazz, represented a small act of resistance for German youth. The Nazis considered jazz particularly threatening because of its African American origins and association with freedom and individualism, concepts contradicting Nazi ideology. While not literally jamming Nazi radio in the technical sense, this musical broadcasting served similar purposes, disrupting Nazi propaganda control and offering alternative cultural visions. The power of music to undermine totalitarian control shouldn't be underestimated. Meanwhile, Nazi leaders were systematically looting Europe's cultural treasures for their own grandiose plans. Nazi leaders hoarded art. For a planned super museum, Adolf Hitler planned the Führer Museum, an enormous art museum in Linz, Austria, his childhood hometown. This museum would house the world's greatest art collection, establishing German cultural supremacy. To stock this museum, the Nazis systematically looted art throughout occupied Europe. Hitler's art historian advisors identified masterpieces, which were seized from museums, private collections, and Jewish families. Hermann Göring competed with Hitler, amassing his own massive collection. Both men viewed art as cultural trophies validating German supremacy. Special Nazi units, particularly the ERR, Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, conducted organized looting across France, Poland, and other occupied territories. Hundreds of thousands of artworks were stolen. The looting was meticulously documented. Catalogs listed seized items. Many artworks remained hidden in salt mines and castles when Germany collapsed. The monuments men recovered vast quantities, but thousands of pieces remain missing today. The Führer Museum was never built. Linz was never transformed into Hitler's cultural capital. The stolen art represented not just theft, but attempted cultural genocide, erasing Jewish and national cultural heritages. While Nazis hoarded treasures, the Soviets were demonstrating their willingness to destroy their own resources. The Soviets burned their own crops to starve. Advancing Nazis. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Stalin ordered a scorched earth policy. As the Red Army retreated, they destroyed everything potentially useful to advancing Germans. Soldiers burned crops, slaughtered livestock, demolished bridges, destroyed factories, and evacuated entire industrial facilities to the Urals. The policy aimed to deprive German forces of resources in occupied territories. The strategy was brutally effective, but created immense suffering for Soviet civilians left behind. Villages burned, food supplies vanished, and people faced starvation. Stalin prioritized denying resources to the enemy over protecting civilian welfare. The scale was unprecedented. Entire industrial cities were dismantled. Machinery was loaded on trains and shipped east for reconstruction beyond German reach. Over 1,500 factories were relocated. The scorched earth policy contributed significantly to Germany's logistical difficulties. German supply lines stretched increasingly thin, while finding nothing useful in captured territories. The Wehrmacht had expected to live off conquered Soviet lands. Instead, they found devastation. The policy exemplified total war's ruthless logic. Victory justifies any sacrifice. As adults waged total war, children became increasingly militarized. German children were trained to fight with hand grenades. As Germany's military situation deteriorated, the regime increasingly militarized Hitler Youth. By 1943, boys as young as 10 received military training. Hitler Youth camps taught marksmanship, grenade throwing, and small unit tactics. This wasn't theoretical education. By 1944, teenagers were deployed in combat. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Jugend, formed in 1943, consisted primarily of 17-year-old Hitler Youth members, led by older officers. They fought fanatically in Normandy, suffering terrible casualties. As the war's final months arrived, increasingly younger children were mobilized. The Volkssturm, Germany's last-ditch militia formed in October 1944, included boys as young as 12 and men as old as 60. Photographs from Berlin's final days show child soldiers in oversized uniforms manning Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. These children, indoctrinated since early childhood, often fought with suicidal determination. The regime's willingness to sacrifice children demonstrated its complete moral bankruptcy. Thousands of boys died defending hopeless positions in the war's final weeks. While children trained for battle, Nazi propaganda continued promoting Germany's supposed cultural superiority. Nazi propaganda used Beethoven to frame Germany as a cultural superpower. Nazi propaganda extensively exploited German cultural heritage, particularly music. Ludwig van Beethoven became a central propaganda figure, portrayed as the ultimate Germanic genius. The Nazis performed Beethoven's Ninth Symphony at party, rallies, and state occasions. Hitler's birthday broadcasts traditionally included Beethoven's music. The regime used Beethoven to argue that German culture represented civilization's pinnacle, justifying German dominance over inferior cultures. Ironically, Beethoven's ideals of universal brotherhood directly contradicted Nazi ideology. The Ninth Symphony's final movement, based on Schiller's Ode to Joy, celebrates human unity, exactly what Nazis opposed. Wagner proved even more useful for propaganda. Hitler attended Bayreuth Festival annually, and Wagner's Germanic mythology aligned with Nazi ideology. The Nazis appropriated German musical tradition, distorting it for political purposes. After the war, this association troubled German cultural identity. Many found it difficult to appreciate Wagner, knowing Hitler's enthusiasm for his music. The Nazis demonstrated how totalitarian regimes exploit and corrupt cultural heritage, transforming art into propaganda instruments while destroying the humanistic values great art actually represents. This appropriation of culture was yet another crime among Nazi Germany's countless atrocities. The WWII military recognized weather's strategic importance. World War II marked meteorology's emergence as a crucial military science. D-Day's timing depended entirely on weather forecasts. Allied meteorologists predicted a brief break in storms on June 6, 1944, enabling the invasion. German meteorologists, lacking weather data from the Atlantic, predicted continued bad weather and assumed invasion was impossible. This intelligence advantage proved decisive. Throughout the war, both sides recognized weather's military significance. Bombers required clear skies. Amphibious operations needed calm seas. Winter conditions dramatically affected ground operations. The military invested heavily in meteorological research and forecasting. After the war, these advances led to early weather modification experiments. Project Cirrus, beginning in 1947, attempted cloud seeding to influence precipitation. While full weather weaponization remained science fiction, WWII established meteorology as vital military intelligence. The ability to predict weather gave operational advantages, and the dream of controlling weather inspired post war research programs. Weather forecasting technology developed during the WWII later benefited civilian meteorology, improving accuracy for generations. Meanwhile, on American soil, thousands of enemy soldiers were living surprisingly normal lives. German POWs were held in the US and made furniture. The United States held approximately 375,000 German POWs in over 500 camps across the country during World War II. Most Americans were unaware of this massive presence. Camps appeared in rural areas across Texas, Oklahoma, Montana, and other states. Under Geneva Convention guidelines, POWs worked, but couldn't directly support the war effort. They labored on farms, in forests, and in camp workshops. Many camps established furniture-making operations, where skilled German craftsmen produced chairs, tables, and cabinets. The furniture quality was excellent. Some pieces survive today as collectibles. POWs earned small wages, could purchase items from camp canteens, and received mail from home. Many camps allowed educational programs and recreational activities. Some communities near camps developed friendly relationships with prisoners. German POWs generally found American treatment far better than Soviet captivity would have been. After the war, some chose to immigrate to America. The POW program represented an overlooked aspect of American home front experience. While German prisoners worked in American camps, German-occupied nations maintained governments in exile. The Queen of the Netherlands broadcast resistance messages from London. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands became one of World War II's most inspirational resistance voices. When Germany invaded in May 1940, the Dutch royal family evacuated to Britain. From London, Queen Wilhelmina broadcast regular radio messages via Radio Oranje to occupied Netherlands. Her speeches, delivered in Dutch, rallied resistance and maintained Dutch morale throughout 5 years of brutal occupation. Unlike some exiled leaders who remained passive, Wilhelmina actively encouraged sabotage and resistance. Her fierce speeches earned German hatred. They called her the only man in the Dutch government. She urged her people to resist, despite knowing the consequences. Her presence in London symbolized legitimate Dutch authority versus the puppet government collaborating with Nazis. Millions of Dutch citizens risked severe punishment listening to forbidden broadcasts. Wilhelmina's voice represented hope and continuity of Dutch sovereignty. When she returned to the Netherlands after liberation in May 1945, enormous crowds welcomed her. Her wartime leadership earned lasting respect, transforming the monarchy's role in Dutch society. While queens inspired from exile, the Nazi regime harbored officers whose private lives contradicted their own ideology. Ernst Röhm was openly gay before Hitler had him killed. Ernst Röhm, head of the Nazi Sturmabteilung, SA, was openly homosexual, though this occurred before World War II began. Röhm led the SA, the Nazi paramilitary organization numbering millions of members. His homosexuality was widely known, documented in letters, and discussed in German society during the 1920s and early 30s. Hitler initially tolerated this, valuing Röhm's organizational abilities and loyalty. However, by 1934, Röhm's powerful SA threatened Hitler's consolidation of power. Military leaders demanded the SA's elimination. On June 30th, 1934, during the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler ordered Röhm's arrest. Röhm was executed on July 1st, 1934. The purge eliminated potential rivals and appeased military establishment. Nazi propaganda then emphasized Röhm's homosexuality to justify the murders. Despite years of prior tolerance, The hypocrisy was staggering. The regime that later persecuted thousands of homosexual men in concentration camps had initially tolerated a gay leader when politically convenient. Rome's story illustrated Nazi opportunism and brutality. While the regime eliminated internal threats, animal heroes continued serving the Allied cause with distinction. A pigeon named Gustav delivered the first D-Day success message. Gustav, a pigeon serving with the Royal Air Force Pigeon Service, accomplished one of World War II's most important missions. On June 6, 1944, as Allied forces stormed Normandy beaches, Reuters correspondent Montague Taylor released Gustav from the beachhead. The pigeon carried the first news of D-Day's initial success, flying 150 miles back to England in just 5 hours and 16 minutes. Gustav's message reached headquarters before any other communication, as radio silence was maintained and other systems were overwhelmed. The message confirmed that Allied forces had established beachheads, crucial intelligence for commanders coordinating the massive operation. For this achievement, Gustav received the Dickin Medal, awarded on September 1, 1944. The citation recognized his delivering the first message from the Normandy beaches under hazardous conditions, thereby contributing to the success of the Allied invasion. Gustav represented thousands of pigeons serving during the war, carrying messages when modern communications failed. These birds proved remarkably reliable, with success rates exceeding 95%. While pigeons carried messages across battlefields, Nazi scientists were developing technology that would transform the post-war world. A Nazi scientist helped invent the modern space program, Werner von Braun. The Nazi scientist who developed the V-2 rocket became the architect of America's space program. During World War II, von Braun led Germany's rocket development at Peenemünde. The V-2 rocket, first launched in 1942, was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. Over 3,000 V-2s struck Allied targets, killing approximately 9,000 people. The rockets were built using concentration camp slave labor at Mittelwerk. Approximately 20,000 prisoners died during their manufacture. As Germany collapsed, von Braun and his team surrendered to American forces through Operation Paperclip. The United States recruited over 1,600 German scientists, deliberately overlooking their Nazi pasts for strategic advantage against the Soviet Union. Von Braun became NASA's chief architect, developing the Saturn V rocket that sent Americans to the moon. His transformation from Nazi weapons designer to American hero remained controversial. Critics argued he should have faced war crimes prosecution for using slave labor. Others contended his contributions to space exploration justified amnesty. Von Braun's legacy remains morally complex. While rockets reached toward space, a simpler invention was revolutionizing everyday writing. WWII inspired the modern ballpoint pen. Laszlo Biro, a Hungarian journalist, invented the ballpoint pen in 1938, but World War II made it essential. Traditional fountain pens leaked at high altitudes and in extreme temperatures, making them useless for aircrew. The Royal Air Force needed reliable writing instruments for pilots and navigators. Biro's design used quick-drying ink and a rolling ball mechanism that worked at any altitude or orientation. The British military ordered thousands for RAF use beginning in 1943. American forces soon followed. The pens proved so successful that after the war, they revolutionized writing worldwide. Before ballpoint pens, people used fountain pens requiring frequent refilling or pencils needing sharpening. The ballpoint's convenience, reliability, and affordability transformed written communication. By the 1950s, ballpoint pens dominated global markets. Companies like Bic made them cheap enough for disposable use. The military necessity drove the innovation, but peacetime applications proved even more significant. Today, billions of ballpoint pens are manufactured annually, descended directly from Biro's wartime invention. While ballpoint pens aided military record-keeping, Allied intelligence was smuggling far more creative items into POW camps. British intelligence used Monopoly games to smuggle maps to POWs MI9, the British intelligence section responsible for helping POWs escape, developed ingenious smuggling methods. They partnered with John Waddington Limited, the UK Monopoly manufacturer, to create special edition games. These games, sent through the International Red Cross to POW camps, appeared identical to regular sets but contained escape materials. Real German, Italian, and French currency was hidden beneath Monopoly money. Compasses were concealed inside game tokens. Most ingeniously, silk maps were hidden within the folded game board. Silk was used because it was quiet, durable, and could be folded extremely small. These maps showed escape routes, safe houses, and neutral borders. The special sets were marked with subtle indicators, a period after Monopoly on the box, for example, so prisoners knew which games contained contraband. The Germans never discovered this operation during the war. Approximately 35,000 Allied airmen were held in German camps, and these escape aids helped hundreds successfully evade recapture. After the war, Waddington's destroyed remaining special sets, but examples occasionally surface in collections. The Monopoly operation exemplified Allied intelligence creativity, and some of those airmen who escaped or fought on D-Day would live to celebrate their service decades later. D-Day veterans made commemorative parachute jumps in their later years. On D-Day's anniversaries, particularly milestone commemorations, surviving veterans returned to Normandy to honor fallen comrades. Some paratroopers, despite advanced age, made commemorative jumps over the original drop zones. Tom Rice, a member of the 101st Airborne Division who jumped into Normandy at age 22, made a tandem parachute jump over Normandy at age 97 during the 75th anniversary in 2019. He said he wanted to honor those who didn't make it. Other D-Day veterans made similar jumps in their 80s and 90s during various anniversaries. These jumps garnered international media attention, showcasing the veterans' enduring spirit and physical courage. The jumps weren't just personal achievements, they served as powerful reminders of D-Day's significance and the sacrifice of the greatest generation. Each year, fewer WWII veterans survive. These commemorative jumps became increasingly poignant as the number of living D-Day participants dwindled. The veterans' determination to jump again, despite age, demonstrated the profound bond formed during combat and the importance of remembering history. Their actions ensured new generations understood the courage required on June 6, 1944. And that brings us to the end of our journey through World War II's strangest corners. From Hitler's nephew switching sides to bears carrying artillery, from ghost armies with rubber tanks to pigeons winning medals for bravery, this war was fought not just with bullets and bombs, but with creativity, absurdity, and the occasional stroke of genius wrapped in complete madness. So, the next time someone tells you they know everything about World War II, just remember, a Spanish chicken farmer became one of the war's greatest spies. The British smuggled maps inside Monopoly games, and somewhere in the Pacific, a Japanese soldier was preparing to fight a war that had already been over for 3 decades. History is never just what they teach you in school. It's weirder, messier, and infinitely more human than any textbook could capture. Sleep tight, and be grateful you've never had to taste Hitler's food for him, fight alongside an inflatable tank, or explain to your commanding officer why the anti-tank dogs just blew up your own position. Sweet dreams. And remember, truth really is stranger than fiction.